Jake Murphy pressed his face against the small window of the transport ship and watched the massive space station grow larger. The Zephyrian Academy looked like a giant crystal floating in space with lights twinkling across its surface like stars. He had never seen anything so beautiful in his 17 years of life on Earth. "First time seeing the Academy?" asked the pilot, a tall blue creature with 4 arms. "It always amazes newcomers." Jake nodded, still staring out the window. 3 months ago, he had been just another high school student in Ohio. Now he was about to become the first human ever to attend the most famous school in the galaxy. The Galactic Species Exchange Program had chosen him from thousands of applicants across Earth. The docking process was smooth and quiet. Jake grabbed his single bag of belongings and followed the pilot through a series of airlocks. The station's artificial gravity felt almost exactly like Earth's, which surprised him. Most alien worlds he had read about had much lighter gravity. "Welcome to Zephyrian Academy," said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see a creature that looked like it was made of living crystal. Its body was tall and thin, with faceted surfaces that caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls. "I am Clix9, your assigned orientation guide." Jake smiled and held out his hand. "Hi, I'm Jake Murphy. Nice to meet you." Clix9 stared at Jake's outstretched hand for a moment, then carefully reached out with one crystalline finger to touch Jake's palm. The contact was brief and gentle. "Human greeting ritual completed," Clix9 said in a musical voice. "Please follow me for your tour." They walked through corridors filled with the strangest mix of beings Jake had ever imagined. A group of floating jellyfish-like creatures drifted past, having what seemed to be a conversation in high-pitched whistles. Near a wall, several small furry beings with 6 legs scurried around in circles, apparently playing some kind of game. "That is a typical recreational activity for the furrians," Clix9 explained, noticing Jake's interest. "They require constant motion to maintain their mental health." They passed a large window that looked out into space. Jake could see Earth in the distance, a small blue dot among the stars. It looked so tiny from here, yet it was the most dangerous planet that any of these species had ever heard of. "Is it true that your planet has large predatory animals that hunt other creatures for food?" Clix9 asked quietly. "Yeah, we have lions, tigers, bears, sharks," Jake said casually. "Lots of predators. But humans are pretty good at staying away from them these days." Clix9's crystal body flickered with what Jake would later learn was the equivalent of nervous laughter. "Fascinating. On my world, the largest predator is about the size of your hand and only eats small plants." They entered a huge circular room with a high ceiling. Students of dozens of different species sat at tables, eating what Jake assumed was lunch. The smell was strange but not unpleasant, like flowers mixed with ocean air. "This is the main dining hall," Clix9 said. "Each species has its own food preparation area to meet their nutritional needs. The human food station was installed last week." Jake looked around at the other students. Many of them were staring at him with obvious curiosity. Some appeared excited while others seemed nervous. A few were taking pictures with small floating devices. "Why are they all looking at me like that?" Jake asked. "You are the first human to ever attend the academy," Clix9 explained. "Most of us have only heard stories about your species. Many of those stories are quite dramatic." A blue-green creature that looked like a cross between a fish and a person approached their table. It wore what appeared to be a specialized suit filled with water. "Greetings, Deathworlder," it said in a bubbling voice. "I am Veshtai from the ocean world of Aquaria Prime. I have heard that your species can survive without water for days at a time." "Well, yeah," Jake said. "I mean, we need to drink water, but we don't have to live in it like fish." Veshtai's large eyes widened. "Remarkable. On my world, being out of water for more than an hour would be fatal to any native species." More students began gathering around their table. Jake found himself answering questions about Earth that seemed obvious to him, but amazed his listeners. Yes, humans could see in the dark better than most species. Yes, they could heal from injuries that would be permanent for others. Yes, they could run long distances without stopping. "Tomorrow you will attend your first physical education class," Clix9 said as the crowd of curious students finally dispersed. "Professor Yinth is very excited to see how a human performs in standard galactic fitness activities. What kind of stuff do you do in gym class here?" Jake asked. "Oh, very challenging exercises," Clix9 replied proudly. "Stretching movements, breathing techniques, balance training. Last semester I managed to touch my knees without assistance for the first time." Jake tried to hide his surprise. Touching your knees was an accomplishment? That's great, he said diplomatically. They spent the rest of the day visiting Jake's dormitory room and the various classrooms. Everything was designed to accommodate multiple species, with adjustable furniture and environmental controls. Jake's room had been specially modified with Earth-normal atmosphere and gravity. That evening, Jake lay on his bed and video-called his family back on Earth. His parents asked about his classes, his roommates, and whether he was eating enough. His little sister Lisa wanted to know if any of the aliens looked like the monsters in her favorite movies. "They're not monsters, Lisa," Jake said. "They're just different, and they all seem really nice." "But are you the strongest one there?" Lisa asked with the typical curiosity of a 12-year-old. Jake thought about Clix-9's pride in touching his own knees, and Veshti's amazement that humans could survive without water. "I guess maybe I am," he said slowly. After ending the call, Jake did his usual evening workout routine in his room. 50 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, and some stretching. It was nothing special, just the same exercises he had done every night since joining his high school wrestling team. He had no idea that in the room next door, Clix-9 was wide awake, listening to the rhythmic sounds through the wall and wondering what kind of training ritual the human was performing. The crystalline being had never heard anything like it. Each repetitive thump sounded powerful enough to crack stone. As Jake drifted off to sleep, he was looking forward to gym class tomorrow. It would be nice to get some real exercise after sitting in classrooms all day. He hoped the activities would be challenging enough to work up a good sweat. In the Academy's administrative offices, Professor Yinth was reviewing Jake's medical files and physical capability assessments. The ethereal being's gaseous form shimmered with excitement. Tomorrow would be historic. For the first time ever, a true Deathworlder would participate in galactic standard physical education. The professor had no idea that tomorrow would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about the limits of biological possibility. Jake woke up feeling great. He had slept well in his new room, and the artificial gravity felt comfortable. After a quick shower and breakfast at the human food station, he met Clix-9 outside their dormitory building. "Good morning." "Jake," the crystalline being said, his faceted surface reflecting the station's artificial sunlight. "Are you prepared for physical education class?" "Yeah, definitely," Jake replied with enthusiasm. "I've been looking forward to getting some exercise. I feel kind of stiff from sitting in those classroom chairs yesterday." Clix-9 made a sound like wind chimes, which Jake was learning meant confusion. "You desire more physical stress? But yesterday was quite demanding. We walked for nearly 2 hours during your orientation tour." Jake almost laughed but caught himself. 2 hours of casual walking was demanding. He had once hiked 15 miles through the mountains of Colorado with his Boy Scout troop. "Walking is pretty relaxing for humans," he said carefully. "We usually need more intense activity to feel like we've really exercised." They joined a stream of students heading toward the gymnasium. Jake noticed that many of them were moving quite slowly, and some were using mechanical assistance devices. Veshti floated past in a mobility chair filled with water, while a group of small fluffy creatures rode on a moving platform. "Are all these students injured?" Jake asked quietly. "Injured?" Clix-9 sounded puzzled. "No, this is normal transportation for longer distances. Walking more than half a mile can be exhausting for most species." The gymnasium was enormous with a high ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. The lighting was soft and warm, and Jake could hear gentle music playing in the background. Students were sitting or lying on various cushioned surfaces, apparently preparing for class. Professor Yinth appeared near the entrance, his gaseous form shifting between different shades of blue and green. "Welcome, student," the professor said in a voice that sounded like a gentle breeze. "Today we have a special treat. Our new human exchange student will be joining us for the first time." All eyes turned to Jake. He waved awkwardly as whispers spread through the group. Some students seemed excited while others appeared nervous or even frightened. "Now, as we learned in our theoretical studies," Professor Yinth continued, "humans come from what we classify as a Class 12 death world. This means their physical capabilities may be somewhat enhanced compared to our own. Jake, please don't feel pressured to keep up with our advanced routines." Jake nodded politely, though he was confused about what could be advanced about lying on cushions. "I'll do my best, Professor." "Excellent. Let us begin with our warm-up sequence. Everyone please stand slowly and carefully. Around the gymnasium, students began the careful process of standing up. Jake watched in amazement as many of them used their hands to push themselves upright, while others required assistance from mechanical devices. The whole process took nearly 5 minutes. "Very good," Professor Yinth said encouragingly. "Now let us begin with basic range of motion exercises. Please raise your right appendage above your head. Take your time and remember to breathe." Jake lifted his right arm straight up without thinking about it. Around him, his classmates were slowly and carefully lifting various limbs, appendages, and manipulator organs. Many of them were breathing heavily from the effort. "Remarkable form, Jake," Professor Yinth observed. "Your species' joint flexibility is quite impressive. Now everyone attempt to touch your torso with your raised appendage." Jake brought his hand down to touch his chest, which was apparently what the professor meant. Looking around, he saw that most of his classmates were struggling to bend their limbs more than a few degrees. Clix9 managed to create a slight curve in his crystalline arm, and the crystal student's body rang like a bell from the strain. "Excellent work, everyone," the professor said. "That completes our flexibility training. Now for our strength conditioning, please place your hands on the floor and support your body weight." Jake immediately dropped into a push-up position, thinking this was the start of the actual exercise. Around him, his classmates were slowly lowering themselves to place their hands on the soft gymnasium floor. Most of them ended up lying flat on their stomachs or sides. "Perfect positioning, Jake," Professor Yinth said with what sounded like approval. "You may hold that pose for up to 10 seconds if you feel capable. Hold the pose?" Jake was confused. This was just the starting position for push-ups. He glanced around and realized that simply supporting their body weight on their hands was the entire exercise for his classmates. Veshtai was shaking from the effort, and Clix9's crystal structure was creaking ominously. "How many should I do?" Jake asked innocently. "How many?" Professor Yinth sounded puzzled. "This is an isometric hold exercise. The goal is duration, not repetition." "Oh," Jake said, still holding the push-up position effortlessly. "How long should I hold it?" "The Academy record is 47 seconds held by a Zentorian student last semester," Professor Yinth replied. "But please don't feel pressured to compete on your first day." Jake waited, thinking the professor would say when to start counting. Around him, his classmates were already collapsing back to the floor, exhausted from their few seconds of effort. Only a handful were still trying to maintain the position. "You may begin whenever you're ready," Professor Yinth encouraged. Jake realized they thought he was already performing the exercise. He had been holding the push-up position for over a minute while they talked, and he felt like he could stay there all day. Professor? Should I do some repetitions instead?" "Repetitions?" The professor's gaseous form shimmered with confusion. "I'm not familiar with that term in this context." "Like this," Jake said, and did a slow push-up, lowering his chest to the floor and pushing back up. The gymnasium fell completely silent. Every student was staring at Jake with expressions ranging from amazement to terror. Clix9 made a sound like breaking glass. "Could you demonstrate that movement again?" Professor Yinth asked in a very quiet voice. Jake did another push-up, then looked up to see why everyone seemed so shocked. "Is something wrong? How did you do that?" Veshtai whispered from his water-filled chair. "You lifted your entire body weight using only your arms." "Well, yeah," Jake said, still in the push-up position. "That's kind of the point of push-ups. Want me to do a few more?" Before anyone could answer, Jake did 10 quick push-ups, counting out loud. With each repetition, the silence in the gymnasium grew deeper. When he finished, he hopped to his feet and stretched his arms. "That felt good," he said cheerfully. "What's next?" Professor Yinth's gaseous form had turned a pale yellow color that Jake would later learn indicated extreme shock. Around the gymnasium, several students had fainted, while others were backing away from Jake as if he were dangerous. "Perhaps," the professor said very carefully, "we should discuss modifying your exercise routine." Jake looked around at his terrified classmates and finally began to understand that something was very wrong. He had just done 10 simple push-ups, the kind of thing he did every morning before breakfast. But judging from everyone's reactions, he might as well have just lifted a car over his head. "Did I break some kind of rule?" he asked nervously. Clix9, who had been silent since the push-up demonstration, finally spoke in a voice like cracking ice. "Jake, in galactic standard measurements, you just lifted approximately 400 pounds 10 times in rapid succession." Jake stared at his crystalline friend. "But it was just push-ups. I can do like 50 of these easy." The sound of Veshitai fainting into his water chair echoed through the silent gymnasium. Word about the push-up incident spread through the academy faster than Jake thought possible. By the time he arrived at the gymnasium the next day, there were twice as many students present as usual. Some were his regular classmates, but others had clearly come just to watch the human. Professor Yinth's gaseous form was a nervous shade of purple as he addressed the crowd. Today we will be conducting a special demonstration with our human student. For safety reasons, all observers must remain behind the designated barriers. Jake noticed that yellow lines had been painted on the floor, creating a large square area around the exercise equipment. His classmates and the visiting students were all standing well behind these lines, watching him like he was some kind of dangerous animal. "Jake," Professor Yinth said carefully, "yesterday's performance was quite remarkable. Today I would like you to demonstrate what you consider normal human exercise capability." "Are you sure?" Jake asked, looking at the nervous faces around him. "I don't want to scare anyone else." "We must understand the full scope of human physical ability," the professor replied. "It is important for interspecies relations and academy safety protocols." Clix 9 stood near the barrier, his crystal structure dim with worry. "Please be careful, Jake. Remember that what seems normal to you might be impossible for us." Jake nodded and walked to the center of the exercise area. He had spent the previous evening thinking about what to demonstrate. He decided to start with something simple that wouldn't seem too extreme. "I'll just do some basic exercises that human teenagers do in school," he announced. "First, I'll do some jumping jacks." He began the familiar movement, jumping his feet apart while raising his arms overhead, then jumping back to starting position. To Jake, it was mindlessly easy. He had done thousands of jumping jacks in his life, but to his alien audience, it looked like Jake was defying gravity. Each jump lifted him several inches off the ground with explosive power. His arms moved with mechanical precision, and he showed no signs of fatigue even after 50 repetitions. "How is he generating that much force?" whispered a student that looked like a walking tree. "His legs are like coiled springs." "The coordination is incredible," added a floating jellyfish creature. "Look how all his limbs move in perfect synchronization." Jake finished a set of 100 jumping jacks and barely felt winded. He looked around at his audience and saw expressions of awe and fear on dozens of alien faces. "That was our basic warm-up exercise," he explained. "Next, I'll do some sit-ups." He lay down on the gymnasium floor and put his hands behind his head. "This works your core muscles," he said, then began doing sit-ups at a steady pace. The aliens watched in fascination as Jake's torso lifted repeatedly from the floor, powered entirely by his abdominal muscles. To them, it looked like he was performing an impossible feat of strength over and over again. "He's lifting his entire upper body using only his midsection," Professor Yinth observed in amazement. "The muscle control required for such precise movement is extraordinary." Jake completed 50 sit-ups and sat up, wiping a small amount of sweat from his forehead. Around the gymnasium, students were taking notes and recording videos. Some of the more delicate species had moved even further back from the barriers. "Now I'll do some pull-ups," Jake said, walking over to a horizontal bar that was part of the academy's exercise equipment. The bar was designed for species to hang from using mechanical assistance, not to actually lift their body weight. Jake jumped up and grabbed the bar with both hands. The metal groaned slightly under his grip, which made several students gasp in alarm. Then he pulled himself up until his chin was over the bar, lowered himself down, and repeated the movement. The gymnasium fell silent except for the sound of Jake's controlled breathing and the slight creaking of the bar. Each pull-up demonstrated strength that seemed impossible to his observers. He made it look effortless, like he was simply moving through water instead of lifting his entire body against gravity. After 20 pull-ups, Jake dropped back to the floor and rolled his shoulders. "That felt good," he said. "The bar's a little thin, but it works okay." Professor Yinth's gaseous form was now flickering between multiple colors, which Jake was learning meant extreme agitation. "Jake, our engineering department rated that bar to support up to 800 pounds of static weight. You were generating dynamic forces well beyond that rating." "Really?" Jake looked up at the bar with new respect. It seemed pretty sturdy. "Should I not use it?" "The bar's fine," the professor said quickly. "It's just that we never expected anyone to actually perform dynamic exercises with it." A small crowd of academy administrators had gathered outside the gymnasium, watching through the large windows. Jake could see them talking urgently among themselves and pointing in his direction. "Is there something wrong?" Jake asked, noticing the worried conversations. "Not wrong exactly," Professor Yinth replied carefully, "but we're realizing that our understanding of human capabilities was significantly underestimated. Could you show us what you consider a challenging exercise?" Jake thought for a moment. He didn't want to do anything too extreme, but they seemed to want a real demonstration. "Well, I could do some burpees. Those are pretty tough." "Please demonstrate," the professor said. Jake dropped into a squat, placed his hands on the floor, jumped his feet back into a push-up position, did a push-up, jumped his feet back to the squat position, then jumped straight up with his arms overhead. Then he immediately repeated the entire sequence. To the aliens, it looked like Jake was performing an incredibly complex athletic routine at superhuman speed. The combination of strength, coordination, and endurance required seemed impossible for any biological creature. He's combining multiple high-intensity movements into a single, continuous exercise, observed a snake-like student with obvious admiration. The energy expenditure must be enormous. Jake completed 20 burpees and stopped, breathing slightly harder now. He looked around at his audience and saw that many of them appeared to be in shock. "How do you feel?" Professor Yinth asked carefully. "Pretty good," Jake replied honestly. "I'm starting to warm up. Back home I'd usually do a few hundred of these, plus some running." The sound of Clicks 9 hitting the floor echoed through the gymnasium as the crystalline student fainted for the second time in 2 days. "Did you say a few hundred?" Professor Yinth's voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah, but that's just normal training," Jake said, suddenly realizing how his words must sound. "I mean, I'm not even on the varsity team at my school. The really athletic kids do way more than me." An emergency alarm began sounding somewhere in the academy. Through the windows, Jake could see security personnel running through the corridors. Someone had apparently decided that the situation required immediate administrative attention. "Jake," Professor Yinth said very calmly, "I think we need to have a serious discussion about human physical capabilities and academy safety protocols." Jake looked around at his frightened classmates, the unconscious Clicks 9, and the crowd of administrators gathering outside. He was starting to understand that being a human at an alien school was going to be a lot more complicated than he had expected. The Academy's main auditorium had never been used for an emergency assembly like this one. Students from every species and grade level filled the curved seating areas, while faculty members floated, crawled, or walked to their designated sections. The air hummed with nervous conversation in dozens of different languages. Jake sat in the front row, feeling like he was on trial. Academy Director Zarathul stood at the central podium, her tall, elegant form radiating authority. She belonged to a species called the ethereals, beings of pure energy contained within crystalline shells. When she spoke, her voice carried throughout the auditorium, without any need for amplification. "Fellow students and faculty," Director Zarathul began, "we are gathered today to address recent developments regarding our human exchange student. What we have learned challenges our understanding of biological limits and raises important questions about academy safety protocols." Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This was not how he had imagined his second week at the academy would go. Around him, hundreds of alien eyes were focused on him with mixtures of curiosity, fear, and fascination. "Professor Yinth, please present your findings," the director continued. The ghostly blue form of Professor Yinth drifted to a secondary podium. Charts and data displays materialized in the air above the assembly, showing exercise measurements and biological analysis. "Based on our observations," Professor Yinth began, "human physical capabilities exceed our previous estimates by factors ranging from 10 to 50, depending on the specific activity. What the human student considers normal exercise would be fatal to most academy species." Worried murmurs rippled through the audience. Jake heard a Furrian student whisper to her friend, "Fatal? Just from exercise?" "For example," the professor continued, "Jake's push-up demonstration generated forces equivalent to lifting a small spacecraft repeatedly. His cardiovascular system operates at efficiency levels we previously thought impossible for biological organisms." More charts appeared, comparing Jake's performance to academy records. In every category, His results were so far beyond the existing records that they barely fit on the same scale. Furthermore, Professor Yinth added, Jake has indicated that his performance represents average human capability, not exceptional ability. This suggests that human physical standards are uniformly beyond anything we have encountered in known galactic species. Director Zarathul stepped forward again. This presents us with a unique challenge. Several species representatives have contacted their home governments, expressing concern about human presence in our educational environment. Jake felt his stomach sink. Were they going to kick him out? Send him back to Earth as a failed experiment? However, the director continued, we must also consider the educational and diplomatic value of this opportunity. We are learning things about human biology that could benefit our understanding of life throughout the galaxy. From somewhere in the middle of the auditorium, a voice called out, but are we safe with him here? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jake stood up slowly, knowing he needed to address this directly. May I say something? He asked. Director Zarathul nodded. Please, Jake, this concerns you more than anyone. Jake turned to face the assembled students and faculty. Hundreds of alien faces looked back at him, waiting to hear what the human would say. I know you're scared, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. I get it. You've seen me do things that seem impossible to you, and now you're worried about what else I might be capable of. He paused, trying to find the right words. But here's the thing you need to understand about humans. Yeah, we're physically strong compared to you. That's because we had to be. Earth is a dangerous place. Jake gestured to the air displays, which now showed images of Earth's landscapes and wildlife. We evolved alongside creatures that could kill us easily. Predators with teeth longer than your fingers. Storms that could destroy entire cities, diseases that wiped out millions. We got strong because the weak ones didn't survive. The auditorium was completely silent now. Even the normally fidgety Furrians had stopped moving. But here's what you're missing, Jake continued. Being strong didn't make us monsters. It made us protective. Humans use our strength to help people, not hurt them. We build hospitals, rescue teams, disaster relief organizations. We use our physical abilities to take care of others. He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many students as he could. Since I've been here, have I hurt anyone? Have I threatened anyone? When Clix9 needed help reaching something on a high shelf, what did I do? You helped him, called out a voice from the crystalline being section. It was Clix9 himself who had recovered from his fainting spell. That's right, Jake said. And when Veshitai's water suit was malfunctioning, did I ignore him because he's different from me? You carried him to the repair station, Veshitai answered from his aquatic seating area. Exactly, Jake said, feeling more confident now. Physical strength isn't about being dangerous. It's about being able to help when help is needed. He turned back to Director Zarathul. I understand if you think I'm too risky to have here, but I promise you, I would never use my abilities to hurt anyone. That's not what humans do. We protect people, especially those who can't protect themselves. A new voice spoke up from the faculty section. It was Dr. Hisnith, a professor Jake recognized from his xenobiology class. Jake raises an important point. In our research into human culture, we have found extensive evidence of humans using their physical capabilities for rescue operations, medical assistance, and protection of other species. That's true, agreed another faculty member. Human space crews have an exceptional record of assisting ships in distress, often at great personal risk. Director Zarathul considered this for a moment. What do you propose, Jake? How can we address the legitimate safety concerns while allowing you to continue your education here? Jake thought carefully. What if I help design new exercise programs? I could work with Professor Yinth to create training routines that are safe for everyone. Maybe I could even help other species gradually build up their strength and endurance. Professor Yinth's gaseous form brightened with interest. That's an intriguing possibility. Human understanding of physical conditioning could revolutionize our approach to health and fitness. And, Jake added, I could help with any situations that require physical assistance. Moving heavy equipment, emergency rescues, that kind of thing. Think of me as the Academy's emergency response team. Clix9 stood up in his section. I support Jake's proposal. He has been nothing but helpful and gentle with all of us. His strength makes me feel safer, not more afraid. I agree, called out Veshitai. When my suit failed, Jake's quick response probably saved my life. More voices joined in. students sharing stories of Jake's helpfulness and kindness. The tide of opinion in the auditorium began to shift from fear to support. Director Zarathul raised her hand for silence. Very well. We will implement a trial program. Jake will work with our faculty to develop appropriate exercise modifications and safety protocols. He will also serve as an emergency assistance resource for the Academy. The director's crystalline form glowed brighter as she made her final statement. This Academy was founded on the principle that diversity of knowledge and capability strengthens us all. Today we choose to embrace that principle rather than retreat from it. The auditorium erupted in applause, whistles, chirps, and other species-specific sounds of approval. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him as he realized he would be staying at the Academy after all. As students and faculty began filing out of the auditorium, Jake found himself surrounded by his classmates. They no longer looked at him with fear, but with curiosity and excitement about what they might learn from him. The crisis was over, but Jake had a feeling that the real adventure was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since the emergency assembly, and the Academy had settled into a new routine. Jake's modified gym classes had become the most popular elective course in the school's history. Students from dozens of species signed up for Introduction to Human-Style Physical Training, though the actual exercises were carefully adapted for alien physiology. Remember to breathe steadily, Jake called out to his diverse class of students. Don't try to rush through the movements. He walked among his students as they performed modified versions of basic stretches. What would have been simple warm-up exercises for humans had become significant challenges for his alien classmates. Clix-9 was working on bending his crystalline joints more than a few degrees, while Veshatai practiced moving his limbs outside of his water suit for short periods. Very good, everyone, Jake encouraged. Zinta, try not to use your anti-gravity organs during the balance exercise. The point is to strengthen your natural stability. The small floating student he was addressing lowered herself to the ground with obvious effort. Like many of her species, she rarely used her legs for actual support, preferring to hover a few inches above the ground at all times. Professor Yinth observed from the side of the gymnasium, his gaseous form a pleased shade of green. The collaboration between Jake and the Academy's physical education department had produced remarkable results. Students were showing improvements in strength, flexibility, and endurance that the faculty had never thought possible. Jake, Professor Yinth called out, could you demonstrate the modified push-up technique again? I believe some of our newer students missed yesterday's instruction. Jake nodded and moved to the center of the exercise area. Okay, everyone. This is what we call an assisted push-up. You're going to place your hands on this raised platform instead of the floor, which makes it much easier. He positioned himself against a waist-high platform and demonstrated the movement slowly. Even this modified version was challenging for most species, but it allowed them to experience the basic motion without risking injury. The key is to start where your body feels comfortable, Jake explained. Some of you might need to use an even higher platform at first, and that's perfectly fine. The goal is gradual improvement, not competing with anyone else. A new student raised a tentacle-like appendage. Human Jake, what is the purpose of these repetitive movements? How do they improve our physical capabilities? Jake had learned to expect this question from new students. The concept of exercise for its own sake was foreign to most alien species, who only moved as much as necessary for survival. Great question, Kelth, Jake replied. When you challenge your muscles with resistance, they adapt by becoming stronger. When you practice movements repeatedly, your coordination improves. When you elevate your heart rate regularly, your cardiovascular system becomes more efficient. He gestured to Clix-9, who was now able to perform movements that would have been impossible for him a month ago. Look at how much Clix-9's flexibility has improved. His crystal structure has actually adapted to allow greater range of motion. Clix-9 demonstrated by bending his arm at the elbow, something that had once caused him significant discomfort. The improvement is remarkable, he confirmed. I no longer experience joint stress during normal daily activities. That's because your body has learned to handle greater challenges, Jake explained. It's like training your mind by studying difficult subjects. The more you practice, the easier normal tasks become. After the class ended, Jake helped his students put away the equipment and sanitize the exercise areas for the next group. These classes had become so popular that the Academy had scheduled 6 sessions per day, with Jake serving as the primary instructor for all of them. "Jake," called a familiar voice from the gymnasium entrance. It was Academy Director Zarathul, accompanied by several official-looking individuals from species Jake didn't recognize. "Yes, Director?" Jake replied, walking over to the group. "I'd like you to meet some visitors," she said. "This is Ambassador Korth from the Galactic Education Council, and Captain Delvix from the Interspecies Health Organization." Jake shook hands with the ambassador, a tall being with blue skin and 4 arms, then carefully touched fingertips with the captain, whose species appeared to communicate partly through tactile contact. "We've heard remarkable reports about your work here," Ambassador Korth said. "The improvements in student health and fitness are unprecedented in galactic educational history." Captain Delvix nodded agreement. "We're particularly interested in your approach to species-adaptive exercise programs. Many worlds are struggling with declining physical health as their populations become more sedentary. We'd like to discuss the possibility of expanding this program to other academies throughout the galaxy," Director Zarathul explained. "Your methods could benefit millions of students across hundreds of worlds." Jake felt overwhelmed by the scale of what they were suggesting. "I'm just one person. I don't know if I could teach enough instructors to make that kind of difference." "That's where we come in," Ambassador Korth said. "The Education Council has resources to document your methods, train instructors, and adapt your programs for different species. You wouldn't have to do it alone." Captain Delvix added, "We've already seen evidence that regular physical activity can extend lifespans and improve quality of life for multiple species. The health implications are enormous." As they talked, Jake's current students gathered around to listen. Many of them had become enthusiastic advocates for the new exercise programs, sharing their improvements with friends and family throughout the galaxy. "Jake has changed our understanding of what our bodies can do," Veshitai said from his mobility chair. "I can now function outside my water suit for 3 times longer than before. My coordination has improved so much that I qualified for advanced engineering classes," added Zinta, who was now standing on her own legs instead of hovering. Director Zarathul smiled, her crystalline form glowing with pride. "Jake, you've done more than just teach exercise techniques. You've shown us that our assumptions about biological limitations were holding us back." Jake looked around at his friends and classmates, thinking about how much had changed since his first terrifying gym class. "If this can help other students throughout the galaxy, then yes, I'd love to be part of it." Ambassador Korth activated a recording device. "Excellent. Let's begin documenting your methods immediately." As the group moved toward the Academy's main conference room, Jake heard his wrist communicator beep with an incoming message. He glanced at the display and saw it was from his family back on Earth. "Jake," his sister Lisa's voice came through the tiny speaker. "I just got accepted into the exchange program. I'm going to study at the Rigelian Mathematical Institute next semester." Jake grinned as he realized what this meant. Lisa was brilliant at mathematics but had never been particularly athletic. If she was anything like him, she was about to give an entire new school system a very different perspective on human capabilities. "Hey, Lisa," he said into the communicator. "Do me a favor when you get there. Start with the easy stuff. You'll understand what I mean when you see their idea of challenging math problems." As he joined the meeting with the galactic officials, Jake reflected on how far he had come from that first nervous day at the academy. He had arrived as a single human student, worried about fitting in with alien classmates. Now he was helping to reshape galactic understanding of physical potential and health. His wrist communicator beeped again with another message. This one was from his friend Danny back home, who held their high school's weightlifting record. "Dude, I just saw the news about what you're doing out there. They want me to apply for the exchange program too. Think I should go for it?" Jake laughed out loud, imagining Danny introducing himself to a gymnasium full of delicate alien students. The galaxy was definitely not ready for that particular cultural exchange, but maybe that was exactly what it needed. As Jake entered the conference room to begin planning the expansion of human-style fitness programs across the galaxy, he had a feeling that this was just the beginning. Humans had always been explorers, pushing boundaries and expanding possibilities. Now they were going to help the rest of the galaxy discover what they were truly capable of achieving.